All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Excess Succeed. This is Gearface. I'm joined today by Bana. Bana, thank you so much for being here.
It's always good to be here.
Super excited to talk to you again. Today, we are talking about everybody's favorite character, no exceptions. All people love to play as and against Hakumen from over in Blaze Blue. Sort of an infamous character in tournaments, as I understand it. I am incredibly excited to learn a little bit about him from Bana here. A couple of disclaimers before we get started, as always. Number one, we are playing to win on this show. We're going to be talking about playing to win. That's not the only way you can play Exceed. You can play Exceed for fun. If what we describe in this episode doesn't sound fun to you, please do not play that way. Play the way that is fun to you. You will play longer that way. You will have more fun doing it. You'll probably learn more in the process. It's going to be a better time all around. Um, Number two, we tend to be pretty prescriptive about strategy on this show. Bana less than most of my guests. He tends to see things from a bunch of perspectives. But remember that these are the rules to Bana's strategy with Hakumen. They don't have to be yours. They probably won't exactly be yours. It's possible that you're going to represent things, or you're going to evaluate things differently than we're representing them. That's totally fine. Exceed's not a solved game. Um, so take all of our proclamations with a grain of salt and tell us why we're wrong. Tell us what we've represented incorrectly. Um, yeah. All that said, though, Bana, tell me a little bit about our boy Hakumen.
Yeah, as you mentioned, he's kind of an infamous character. You pick Hakumen, and then your opponent usually tilts, and that's all you need to win. You just pick Hakumen, your opponent's gonna tilt, and you're just gonna kill him.
You're just gonna
And
ride that mental damage to a win.
yeah, that's correct.
Yep.
In all seriousness, it's more complicated than that. I mean, Hakumen. He can be strong. Like the way, like once you optimize Hakumen, I think he can be very strong. But it's not like he's a brain dead character. He kind of takes some work, and once your opponents like actually understand Hakumen, it becomes infinitely harder to. Well, I wouldn't say infinitely, but it does become much harder to win with him. Just because he does have a lot of moving parts and actual weaknesses you can exploit. So, everyone says, "Oh man, he's this like S tier god character." He's not that. He's just a character you kind of need to understand to play against.
Sure.
Of course, once you've reached that level, then you got to go to the level above that. So Hakumen's interesting. We're gonna have to talk about a few layers of Hakumen. Um, I mean, before we move on to layer one, I guess so we'll just go over the character here just so we can add some context to it.
Sure. Sounds good.
Um, so yeah, we just see Hawkman's character card here. After drawing for end of the turn, he just gets a free gauge. And then once you got 8, you can exceed, and then you just have free gauge for a few turns.
Okay.
It's only 4 because he has a kicker that shortens his exceed time, but it's not that big of a deal. You get a card back from your was it overdrive area for your kicker, so you get to reuse cards. But based on just seeing the whole, oh, I get free gauge at the end of every turn, and I just have a pretty powerful exceed mode. Layer one Hakumen's a lot of like, okay, we're gonna do some passive play. I'm gonna like boost. I'm gonna do some prepare actions. I'll just like do some micro movement, just anything I can to like just safely gain gauge, and then you're just gonna spam your powerful tools at them. That's Yeah, I would say that's a layer 0 rather than layer 1.
Okay.
That's the very scrubby way to play Hakumen, and it against someone who's new, that's kind of powerful, but I would say that's not a winning line once you get to higher levels. It can backfire pretty hard.
Okay.
But
So
that is kind of like where we start with Hakumen.
right, that's the starting point. So, and when you talk about your powerful tools that are enabled by Gauge, just very quickly, briefly going over this kit, I'm seeing
Yeah.
that every single card is not just his ultras that would be enabled by this. All of his cards have spend a gauge on them as
Yeah.
part of their kicker. So all of those things in his Exceed mode are free as well.
Yes, that's correct.
He's got a free zero gauge Yukikaze and Shipu, but also all of these cards are otherwise would be have a gauge expense on them.
Yeah, yeah.
So that layer 0 Hakumen is basically like wait 8 turns, blow your opponent up for 4 turns, wait 8 turns, probably less because you'll be getting some gauge on defense as well. Like
Yeah, yeah.
things will be progressing a little bit faster than that, but basically like do nothing, do nothing, do nothing, do nothing, kill him, kill him, kill him, do nothing, do nothing, do nothing. That's kind of the beginning point of Hakumen that you're describing, right?
Yeah, that's kind of, yeah, like that's the layer 0 is we do that. And we're gonna, I guess, when I say build on top of that, it's more a better, more correct thing to say is your opponent's gonna stop you from doing that. So now you have to build a game plan that says we're going to have to take into account the fact that my opponent's just not gonna let me build and then kill them.
Right.
I'm
So
gonna have to, do some other things in between the building. When I try to kill them, they're gonna prevent me from doing that. So I have
right.
to have a plan in mind for when
You
they throw a
talk
wrench into it.
you talk a lot about on previous lessons, Bena, you've talked a lot about having like a non-compliant opponent, having someone who's not
Yes.
just willing to go along with your game plan. For Hakumen, it seems like though if my opponent does nothing, if they just prep themselves or they take kind of a passive approach, a more defensive approach to the game, I'm getting away with a lot as
Yeah, yeah,
Hakumen.
you sure are. Yeah.
Just by building gauge every turn, I'm kind of exerting pressure to make my opponent kill me.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
that makes
like if you just have like a good early game and your opponent just like threw away a bunch of cards and now they're in the spot where they're like, oh, I gotta give Hakumen a few turns. That's a game you're very happy to be in
okay.
because then you just get to go, well, they got to spend some time rebuilding, but that means I'm getting closer to my win condition.
Right. Okay.
So, when you're
So
in that situation, it's like, yeah, you're fine to build. But like I said, opponents don't want to comply, so usually they'll try to minimize that aspect when fighting Hakumen.
okay, sure, that makes sense. Just like it seems
Mhm.
like it's important that like I'm exerting pressure to make them kill me just by kind of hanging around. Like my game plan is progressing if they do nothing, so they have to do something.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah, that is one of the main takeaways with fighting against Hakumen. We can go into that a bit more later,
sure.
but yeah, you just can't let Hakumen build. You can't be afraid of Hakumen. You have to actually like hit him.
Right.
All right.
You have to be proactive into him. Okay, so
Yeah,
that's
you
the
should
that
be.
that's the basics of what he's doing. Where to next, Banna?
Mhm. I guess we'll go over his cards now, just so that I'm gonna be talking a lot about strategy and some other like holes in Hakumen's game plan, but that won't make sense until we go over his cards. So we'll just quickly do that.
Yeah, sure thing.
Yeah, so we'll just go over, I guess, his attacks real quick, and then we'll go over boost after that. Yeah, we'll start with Enma here. You have your 1/4/6 with 3 guard. Surprisingly, usually you don't see guard on a fast move. If you have 1 gauge, then this is a 1 to 2 special. Um, so this I would say this is one of Hakumen's better ones, just because he's kind of strapped for like a fast options. So he gets one more with Enma here. That 3 guard is usually not relevant, but I mean, it does let you guard through, certain a lot of the DPs in this season anyway. It doesn't work against Noel's DP, but against Jin or Ragna on defense, it'll guard through that just fine. So
Right, to confirm a hit.
as utility there.
I,
Just
I'm
and just in general, having a 1 to 2/6 move is just all right. It lets you call out cross if your opponent's like trying to get away.
right.
So
I'm noticing that the before effect probably, yeah, like all of these, they all say you must spend. the
Yeah,
gauge.
you must. That
So
is correct.
so as we get into these cards, Bana, let me make sure I'm evaluating this right. My character ability says after drawing at the end of my turn, I add the top card of my deck to my gauge, which means that if I'm spending my turn attacking, I'm not doing that because I'm not drawing at the end of my turn because
Correct. Yep.
that's how Exceed works. So all right, so striking at all means that I don't get this. If I
Hmm.
strike with a special, that means that not only am I not getting the passive gauge generation, I'm also losing a gauge. And then
Correct.
my card will go to gauge, meaning that at best, if I'm striking with a special, I will be gauge neutral. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Does that mean that on front side I need to be like I need to I'm disincentivized from striking with specials? Like I don't want to do that because it'll keep me from building?
Yes and no. Yes, in that it does. You are disincentivized to like you're not building if you're striking with your specials on front side. I will say the no side of that answer is sometimes you have no choice, and also if you're well, one is you have no choice. Two is if your opponent knows you're not going to strike with your specials, then they filter your options better. They just go, oh well, this Hakumen just wants to build to 8 gauge. They're never gonna strike me with their Enma at range 2. I get to just freely cross if, like, say, your crosses are already down, right? So
Right.
you need ways to keep them on their toes. And I guess the third option for why you want to use your specials is you have options in your gauge that you don't want to be there and you just want to get them out of there. That's usually not
Oh.
happening. Like, well, so I guess we're jumping ahead a little bit,
You know,
but because you're getting
if this isn't the right time to talk about it, that's
it's
totally fine.
fine.
But
Well, I mean,
okay,
like we're going through the list, so I might as well describe the last point here. But anyway, with Hakumen's ability, you're getting random cards into your gauge, right? Um, so there's this aspect that you don't really control. A lot of you, or sometimes you'll like flip a card into your gauge, and you go, "Man, I really wish I had drawn that instead."
right.
Um,
You get a sweep in there or something. You're like, oh, that's a great card to play. I'd like to actually
yeah.
hit with that at some point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so like Hakumen does have the ability to get that back with his exceed mode with the kicker,
Right.
but the thing about Hakumen is like you also have to manage what's in your gauge. Just because if you have so many cards in your gauge, it means that when you go through your reshuffle, you have sometimes you want options in there that you didn't manage to get into your discard pile in time.
Okay.
So you occasionally want to, you'll kind of want to use your specials to, get certain things in back into your discard pile so that you can refresh that later. That's a little bit more advanced, but like that's not as someone who's starting out as Hakumen, you don't worry too much about that. It becomes more evident as you play more with Hakumen, but it is something to keep in mind. So
Okay. But
since we're on, yeah.
at the very least, so I've got 8 cards in my gauge. They're all going to overdrive. That means that 4 of those cards I'm able to recur with my overdrive
Mhm.
kicker. It
Yeah.
sure would be nice if those 4 cards that I'm recurring were good cards that I'd like to use.
Mhm.
So if I could to when you're talking about like controlling what is in my gauge, if I have more use for it for Enma than this block that I happened to drop in my gauge from the top of my deck, maybe spending one to put something better in there is valuable. Is that kind of what you're saying?
So, I mean, you were saying with like you'd rather have Enma than block. I mean, block's a pretty good example of. Usually, you'd rather once you flip as Hakumen, you'd rather be aggressive to take advantage of the fact that you have this reduced gauge cost.
Right.
So having block, I mean, sometimes you'll keep block into your gauge. Like all things, you sometimes want certain options, but for the case of block, I completely skipped the kicker on Hakumen, but you reshuffle on Exceed. Let's
Oh,
say,
okay.
yeah, that prevents him from decking out as fast as or as fast as other characters, just because if you're putting a card in Gauge, you're like churning through the deck faster than everyone.
Right.
So, in the case of block, if you are reasonably sure you don't want to recur it, then you want to throw that into your discard pile before you exceed, so that you can recur your aggressive cards, and if your opponent does like threaten you, you could wild swing into your block. Because if
Okay.
if you're in that situation where like you put both your blocks in your Gauge, you exceeded, you reshuffled, and your opponent attacks you with a very scary option, and you just like don't have an answer to it, you're gonna really wish you had those blocks back in your deck there, right? So
Right.
it's
Okay.
things
So
like that you gotta think about. It's like
just
what.
upping your odds a little bit to in
Mhm,
those situations. So and because this exceed mode will happen before my overdrive triggers ever happen. My gauge is rather my gauge is the one thing that isn't being shuffled back in, kind of to your point.
that is
Um,
correct.
and then my overdrive, then one card will go to discard every turn of my overdrive, just like every other character. Like my
Mhm,
overdrive triggers from overdrive. I put a card in discard, and then I put another card back in my hand. Right.
mhm,
Okay, so I can't recur everything. I'm gonna be picking and choosing.
mhm,
Um, and and the kind of dead cards that I want in my gauge are dead cards that I wouldn't even want in my deck to wild swing because I'm not going to be reshuffling them. And
mhm.
then the remainder of my gauge is stuff that I kind of do want to recur. Is that am I thinking about
Yeah,
that right?
that is about right.
Okay.
I would say it's about correct with that. I mean, obviously, like you don't have full control, so you'll sometimes have like maybe six options that you would like to recur, but you can only pick four of
You can
them.
only get four, of
That's not like
course.
the worst. Yeah, that's like that's not the worst place to be. If it's just, oh, I have six options, I just pick the best four. That's fine.
Right, yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's a lot of like, if you can play a perfect Hakumen, it would be, yes, just the options you want to have access later, you shuffle back. The things you don't want to see ever again, you discard to your overdrive, and the things you really want to play again, you
You
retrieve.
recur and play more quickly. Okay, I got you.
Yeah.
So I think now I'm caught up on where we were with Enma. Sorry for that
Hmm.
interlude there.
That is all right. This is the Hakumen experience. It's we talk about one thing, and then we realize, oh, that how does that fit in with the rest of
Right.
Hakumen?
Everything influences everything else. He's a big puzzle box of a character.
He kind of is, yes.
Okay. Okay. So we've got a card that just is like it's a cross catcher on offense. It's a just a reasonable poke. It looks like.
Yeah, just a reasonable poke. Just nice to have, especially as we like go through the rest of the cards here. We might as well move on to Gurren. We have it's not quite a fast dive, but it basically functions like a fast dive. It just doesn't say before close three. It just says 1 to 4, and then you spend a gauge to close one or two. So if you think about it, it's very very similar to most fast.
Right.
You usually range two. I mean, there might be occasions where you'd stop at range three and maybe play assault after or something, but I find more often than not you just want to get closer. Um, Yeah, there's also a funny thing with this where, like, turn 1, you can actually do the move won't move
Oh,
with this,
sure.
because you
Because
don't have gauge, so you poke the opponent and you don't actually close in.
okay, so as soon as you have any gauge, you no longer have the move don't move mix up because both of the things that you would be using lose to sweep.
Correct.
That's kind of funny. All right.
Yeah.
So is that a viable like opener for Hakumen, or is that not really the kind of thing he wants to be doing?
It depends on the matchup. I found, like, it's not as valuable as, like, as I figured out Hakumen. I don't really just spend Gurren turn 1 and just laugh at the opponent for trying to sweep me, but like there are it's also like character based. Like if the opponent has a bunch of sweep likes, and not a lot of stuff at range, then like this is probably actually an opportune time to just sneak in 3 damage, and then you got to figure out the rest later.
Right.
But you get against the most average characters, like I would say, it's not really worth doing that.
Okay. Makes sense. But so otherwise, it's pretty much a fast dive. You use
Yeah,
it
it's a
when you use
fast
fast
dive.
dive. You gain advantage
Yeah,
afterward, which is probably pretty cool.
yeah. You use it as a fast dive. You use it as another copy of assault. Just at range 3 if you need it. Um, just basically having like maybe a slightly weaker assault is just fine. Hakumen appreciates being able to go to range 1 and have advantage. So also another card he appreciates. Oh, I guess we'll move on to Renka here. This is like one of the worst kick shapes. It's a 1 to 2, 4, 4 with hit, push 1 or 2 if you have gauge. Has like armor, which a lot of kicks don't really have, but I find that rarely matters. Um, what was it? A lot of kicks tend to like either give you advantage or like give you a lot of value, but like this one really doesn't.
Right.
So I'm not really too happy to play this card, I guess. I mean, if you need to beat sweep at range 2, like it'll do the job, but not much else, I would say.
Okay. So far,
Um,
having gone through three of his specials, I'm noticing that like if the gauge cost on these was free, um, how do I put this? If the gauge cost on this was free, this becomes on curve. This becomes a fast dive that gains advantage. This becomes anything at all, basically. Like it
yeah, yeah,
functions as a kick when you spend
yeah, yeah,
gauge.
yeah.
If you're not spending gauge, these don't seem incredibly remarkable so
No,
far, at least.
they.
And if you do spend gauge, they don't feel like they're overwhelming. This one feels like it even has a function when you're spending gauge. This one just becomes on curve. Um,
Mhm.
so like it is that one of the weaknesses of the uh
Yeah, I'm
built?
glad you picked up on that. Yeah, Hakumen kind of just doesn't have great specials.
Okay, so
I'll
it,
well,
it
I'll put it all together once we're done talking about Yanagi, maybe. And then I can discuss more about like I guess the fault with specials here,
okay.
if you don't mind.
Oh, sure, yeah,
Yeah.
please go
So
ahead.
yeah, and then we have finally, finally to round out specials. Ignore the fact that Zantetsu here has a special border. That's it's actually an ultra. We gave it the special border for sure, we'll just say balance, balance purposes, but this is basically an ultra. It's an
Right,
honorary ultra.
right, okay,
uh so what moving back to Yanagi, so this one's just, I guess this is what I would call like a fast punish. Like if you got hit, like you get to counterattack for greater damage.
right,
But
sure, yeah. You just trade up on fast options. It would
yeah,
count. It would your cross catcher, grasp counter, stuff like that. It's got enough
yeah,
of a
yeah,
range band that it
exactly.
can get in. Okay,
Yeah, it gets in, but it's not great against slows. Just auto loses to mid speeds on defense. So once again, kind of like has niche applications, but not amazing. So like if we're talking about specials, I would say like, what was it? I'd probably say like Hakumen gets more utility out of an assault like than he does uh on curve speed 6. This is kind of like how I would rank his special attacks. Like this one's pretty useful. This one I actually like a lot, but it's probably less useful than this if we really need to rank it. This has niche application. This one I don't even like all that much at all.
okay,
It's like, okay, so we've got like, this is, I say like Hakumen likes this, but yeah, you said it's kind of like, well, it's a fast dive, and I even described it as like worse. You use it as a worse assault if need be.
right,
So like, it's not a great shape, I guess. I mean, it's fine. Like it's above curve, so you'll always be fine with that. And this is just kind of on curve, not too special. This is this is super niche because like you only beat fasts with that and then nothing else. And then, like I said, it's we finally have a almost functional kick with gauge. Otherwise, it doesn't
Right.
really do a
Otherwise,
whole lot.
it's just a mid speed that loses to things.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
basically.
so I have with gauge. Some of these are functional. Some of these are actually become quite decent. Without gauge, some of them are really don't do anything at all, and some of them
Yeah,
are they're
yeah,
okay. But clearly, this is not where my power is
yeah, yeah. It's not.
these attacks.
Yeah, I would say like usually you will have gauge, but like you just need to think about like if these were like one gauge, like they let's say they had gauge specials or something in the game.
Right.
Like would these attacks be one worth one gauge? The answer is not really no.
Right.
They're
Right.
only functional because Hakumen is a character that can get free gauge.
That
So
that
they're
that
like,
can that can passively build gauge. And honestly,
yeah,
if Gurren was a fast dive that had flexible positioning and gained advantage, that'd be a pretty solid card. Like if it had no gauge cost at all,
hmm,
right? If it was just
yeah,
Gurren was like uh Totsugeki, right?
yeah,
It's
yeah,
similar in value proposition to a fast dive that gains advantage. It's a little bit worse than that card. Like, yeah, that'd be good. That'd be a solid card. These would be pretty good if they didn't have the gauge rider and just always had their stuff.
hmm,
But it's not like I can't wait to exceed. I'm gonna turtle up and wait for 8 turns so that I can play these cards. Clearly
no.
that's not the plan.
That is not the plan at all. I mean,
Okay.
you will play like you will probably play was it Gurren and Exceed mode just because you gain advantage and you want to it lets you then keep your offense going.
Okay.
But like you're not really happy playing any of these on Exceed side. Like it's probably will just because you will just have to at some point. But
Right.
this is
But
you're not
that's
You're
not
not going, "Oh, yeah, time to play Yanagi now that I've
yeah,
exceeded."
I've
That's
now that
where
I've
yeah.
finally exceeded, I get to play these cards. So we have other
Mhm,
cards over here that I have a feeling that we're going to talk about more in terms of why you're
mhm.
why it would be valuable to exceed in the first place, because clearly it's not these.
Yeah,
Okay.
that is correct.
Okay.
So, yeah, like, mediocre specials, not where you wanna be with Hakumen. We'll move on to his ultras. We'll start with the honorary ones on Tetsu.
Yes.
I call this an honorary one just because it does if you read it, it does say, like, "Yeah, you're gonna be spending 2 gauge on this."
Right.
I
Because
mean, I guess you could. Yeah, otherwise
otherwise,
you're not getting a lot.
yeah, with no gauge at all, this is a I guess like really bad focus, maybe really bad sweep.
Yeah, with no gauge, it's that. I mean, I guess it's functional at one gauge because then at least you can kill block.
Right.
But once you have two gauge, though, this is the ultimate slow killer. Just like cuts all slows in half, basically. Just
Yeah.
kills sweep, kills focus, kills block. It's pretty great. It's a your opponent doesn't want this to land, so they'll probably do what they can to prevent you from chopping them in half with Santetsu.
Okay.
So it's
So
like you gotta like figure out when's the right time to play this, because otherwise your opponent will try to check you with their grasps and
right.
cross and stuff, and
They'll
then you
cross
feel
out.
very
So
sad.
that's kind of what maybe that's what these cards are kind of for. Then is
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah.
your opponent is going to be so afraid of Zantatsu that you're like, cool, I catch you crossing out at 2. You cross out at 1. I follow you in and trade up. That's kind of what these are for. Then
Mhm. Yeah, that's basically what those are for.
okay.
Yeah, like ideally, I mean, I guess a common theme with Hakumen is like if you're gonna like try to call someone out, usually you'd rather like say, oh, if you want to catch the cross or check their grasp, you'd rather use your grasp of your own because then you're actually building gauge instead of being neutral.
True.
But
Okay.
sometimes you just don't have this, so you just have to make do with the fact that you have these, and you're just gonna have to be content with, well, we baited an answer, we're kind of like not making progress towards getting to 8, but
We
it's
we
fine. It's
we did some damage. We got rid of a card that is going to kill
yeah,
our game plan later on. Is
yeah. If you
I-
sorry, go
I'm
ahead.
I'm not sure if this is the right time to ask this question or if we should wait until we talk about like economy and payouts and stuff. But
Mhm.
is it worth it to play Zantetsu when you aren't exceeded, or is getting it for free an important enough part of the value proposition of Hakumen that I need to be waiting to do this?
So I'll play Zantetsu unexceeded all the time.
Okay,
Uh, like obviously, if you exceed and you can do it, great, wonderful. You're living the Hakumen dream.
right,
But I guess my theme is your opponent's gonna be non-compliant. They're gonna do something, or yeah, they're gonna go, yeah, I think you're not gonna play this because then you're like 2 gauge down, and you're gonna be further away from getting to 8 and becoming really scary.
right.
So I'm just gonna disrespect you.
And then they
Well,
and then you hit
that's
them for 7 and
yeah, it's a
kill
percent.
their focus. Right. Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of like the idea. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
It's,
So
you gotta understand what your opponent's tendencies are. So, like, that's gonna be part of Hakumen is, you can't just throw this out randomly because, like, if you lose this strike because they successfully called it out and they grasp you, like, oh, you're down a gauge and you're down one of your best tools. It
right.
feels really
It
bad.
feels bad. Right. So if this was an ultra, it'd be a pretty good 2 gauge ultra. Right?
Yeah, yeah,
I feel like if that's how we are thinking about it, then yeah, throwing out a 2 gauge ultra, it could be free later. Um, but that's this is good enough to spend 2 gauge on.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I like throwing out Zantetsu when I feel confident my opponent's like trying to like check me with a slow or something. Like, obviously I'd rather play this on offense because then you can like check sweep.
Right. You
But
can cleanly beat sweep, which feels pretty good.
yeah, as opposed to trading. But if you have to like trade up by one against sweep, like, well, we'll take that. We won't be happy, but we'll take it.
Right.
Anyway, I guess we'll move on to the next ultra. We have the king of making people tilt, Kokujin Yukikaze. Um, we have a 4 gauge alt that has 0 power, but if you were hit, then you basically auto hit the opponent for 6 back. Um,
And you
you know,
can't
it's
die.
yeah, you can't die. So like,
Right.
that's the part that like makes people tilt a lot is like you'll get to end game with Hakumen. Both of you are at like single digits, but Hakumen's either in exceed mode or he's got like a bunch of gauge and his Yukikaze up, and you're like, oh, I just can't kill him. What do I do? But yeah, this is I mean, a lot of people are afraid of this card. My opinion is you shouldn't be afraid of Yukikaze. Because it only does 6. You
Right.
can like you can sweep into this, and even though you traded even on damage, like Hakumen probably spent 4 gauge on this, so it's like you're winning unless he's in exceed mode, in which case, well, why are you striking into Hakumen when he's in exceed mode?
At low life when Yukikaze is still up,
Yeah,
right? That requires some. Speaking of a non-compliant opponent,
yeah.
so does this have value for you? I mean, it's also close 8, so you've got some pretty strong anti-zoning tool on this. Is this of value to you if you aren't about to die?
Oh yeah, it's still you still have value for this even if you're not about to die. It's I don't want a Yuki Kaze all the time just because it is, setting yourself back 4 gauge is a tall ask. But, sometimes your opponent is gonna play a card that you reasonably think, well, I don't really have any other answer to that. I don't really want to just let them have that strike for free, and that makes Yuki Kaze a good like answer shape.
Right.
Like,
Sure.
if
Okay.
they're, if for some reason Sagat got a cross off and went, all right, it's time to tiger shot you to death, you can be like, well, I'll play Yuki Kaze. It's way better than getting tiger shot to death. It'll
R-
get me back in
Right.
the right range. Yeah.
So you're probably playing it then to not die or to close in or because you really, really need stun immunity. Because if you were at range 1 and just wanted to hit for 6 damage, you would just play sweep and save yourself
Yeah,
40 H.
usually.
So you're using it because it has those special properties. And I can think of plenty of times when a stun immune strike would be useful. I can think of plenty of times when close 8 would be useful. But I'm not like you said, this is an answer card. I'm not trying
Mhm.
to set up a situation where I can hit with Yukikaze because I don't really want to need to hit with Yukikaze.
Mhm. I mean, usually. So like all things, I say that there will always be situations where you might just want to actually initiate with Yukikaze and bait the opponent into thinking, oh, like, oh, he's gonna try and kill me with his Zantetsu. I'm gonna grasp him,
Right,
and that's like the only like you don't have grasp or any of your other like fast checks, and this is all you have.
right.
I mean, that's not the greatest spot to be in, but I mean, I've seen plenty of players do stuff like that with
Okay.
success. So,
Like with Zantetsu, are you mostly trying to play this in Exceed mode where it's free because 4 gauge is more than 2?
mhm.
For what sounds like kind of a specific answer shape, or is it just like when you need it, when you need to close 8, it's worth 4 gauge?
If you're in like level 0 Hakumen, you probably play this in Exceed mode. I've been finding like once again as the matchup gets developed, people would rather just try to wait out Hakumen's Exceed mode, which means like the opportunity to use Yukikaze is lessened.
Oh, sure, because you're like, hit me, no, hit
Yeah.
me, please, hit me, and then your Exceed mode's
Yep.
ticking down, and you haven't hit with this card, and
Yeah, yeah.
then you're out of Exceed mode, and you don't get to hit with it anyway. So
Yeah.
maybe just play it when you think you're going to need to close 8, or when you think you
Yeah.
need stun immunity, or when you need
Yeah.
to not
I'll
die.
I'll I'll play this outside of Exceed mode like I find I'm playing it outside of Exceed mode more often, but I mean, as I described, like if the opponent's like waiting you out and they're trying to like check you for Zantetsu or Shippu once we get to that, like yeah, you can certainly just play Yukikaze
Okay,
because then at least you're gonna get for free. You're trading up, but if because usually like that's usually the how it works in Exceed mode is like yeah you're using this as kind of a mix up tool at that point.
right,
It's like I said, it's kind of expensive, and the value proposition of having Yuki Kaze up is a little bit better than just trying to throw it out as a mix up. I prefer not to, but you know, as I said with earlier with Hakumen, like you have the things you get into your gauge are random, so sometimes you just have to roll with the tools that RNG has given you instead of the ideal scenario.
okay, I get you.
Yeah. Anyway, I
Yeah,
guess
tell me about
we
Chippu.
mentioned ship boost. Guess I'll move on to that. So here we are. We have another kind of scary ultra. It's it says printed power 4, but you usually try to engineer it so you're hitting for 8.
Right.
So and you also have 2 armor. So this is like a 10 delta. It's pretty pretty good.
Yeah, that's a
This is
lot of
an
number. That's a lot of number.
Yeah, it's a lot of number. Like I said, your opponent might just try to check this with their grasp. Like you're still hitting them and you're still trading up if they grasp you. So like it's not the end of the world if that happens. But like I said, your opponent's going to try and check for this if you're in exceed mode because like a 10 or just eating 8's such a devastating like proposition. And like I
Right.
said, and then that lets you open up the avenue of like say Yuki causing their answer to that, and then you get into the Yomi layers and all that.
Right.
Um,
And like even if you just play this without Yukikaze as part of the mix up, you throw out Chipu at range 1 and they cross out and you're like, well, okay, I still traded up, I still hit you for 6. Sorry, I still hit you for 4 and took 1 because a 1 to
yeah,
6 range band is pretty nuts.
yeah, it's a pretty good range band. Yeah, usually like you'll try and engineer it so that your opponent won't have the cross, and you can try and hit them with this because then it's just a lot more value than that way. But you take what you can. This is I've also used this as a jank projectile at some point. I don't recommend doing that, but there are matchups where, let's say, your opponent decided I need to escape Hakumen and maybe get my second win or something, and then you just Shippu them for 4 damage, and then 4 damage again with your second copy of Shippu from across the screen, and you know what?
That's like
That's a
hitting it right.
free 8 damage.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's just like hitting with one at close up, but you didn't take any damage back. In fact, it's
yeah,
better.
yeah,
So
yeah.
same question as with the other ultras here and honorary ultras. It sounds like you're okay playing this out of exceed mode as well, as long as you are getting your hit range 1 to 2
Hmm.
effect on top of it. Like so. Now that we've kind of gone through most of them, I seems like I should be thinking about my exceed mode as a way to like loosen up my economy, but it's not my whole game plan. I'm actually okay to spend gauge fairly freely as I'm building it.
Uh, Sort of. So my opinion is you should be spending some, just because if you're not, then what are you doing? And also you're not checking your opponent with option or your scariest options when they least expect it.
Right.
But Hakumen's I don't even want to say like his exceed mode is his win con. I would say like exceed mode is like a prevent yourself from losing condition, I guess. Um, just because, like I said, with the front side, you're churning through the deck very quick.
Right.
You will want to exceed just for that reshuffle kicker. Otherwise, like you are at very high risk of just losing to deck out.
Of just dying. Okay, so
Yeah.
I'm recurring forever. I'm just I'm impossible to stall out. I'm gaining passive pressure just by exceeding. But it seems like then really the things that I'm excited to hit with are Zantatsu and Shipu. Is that correct?
Mhm. I would say that. That's whenever I hit those, I'm definitely feeling like I'm back in control of the game. So.
Okay. Okay. So these are my big scary threats that are enabled by my exceed mode, but I can
Mhm.
play them outside of it, and maybe I should in order to keep that threat alive. Um, in terms of uh my overdrive trigger, return a card from my overdrive to my hand.
Mhm.
If I do hit with Shipu or Zantetsu in on front side and then exceed with those in my gauge, I assume they're also amazing cards to recur.
Yeah, no, it's great. You get to do it again.
Okay, so that's actually even a greater upside is that I could conceivably hit with more Zantetsus if I was willing to do it on in basic mode as well.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So I'm kind of putting a lot of stock into a couple of cards here.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, Hakumen's like his most of his stock is in like his ultras
Right.
and like not so much his specials, but
Right. Okay.
you know.
And before we get into boosts and things like that and the other
Mhm.
part of the game plan, obviously I can recur normals as well. With my ability, is there like
Mhm.
do you have kind of like a heuristic for priority on what you're recurring when you're exceeding, or is it just kind of what's in the
Uh
moment?
it's so usually there kind of is. I guess the heuristic is, well, did I hit with focus or did I put it in my gauge? Well, that's probably going back to my hand at some point during exceed mode,
Right.
just because.
Focus is good.
Yeah, it's good, and also I have a reading threat live at all times. I feel like the stocks for focus have gone down as the matchup develops, just because people realize when you have focus engage and you're at like 8 gauge, they go, "Oh, Hakumen's gonna exceed and he's gonna read me. I should probably
Time to start ditching normals.
yeah, stuff like that."
Right. Or
But
time to
even
immediately read your focus that you just recurred and spike you or something.
I mean, that's usually what you wanna do is, you use the reading the turn you recur it so that you can prevent
Oh,
that
right.
situation.
Overdrive trigger is at the beginning of the turn. That's right.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So you would use a card that you wanted to play anyway. You would recur a card that you wanted to play anyway, or if you just had a boost that you wanted to play, which
Yeah.
it turns out Zantetsu and
Mhm.
Shippu are cards that you want to hit with, so it makes sense to recur them. Are you also trying to specifically fish for EXs, or is because of how random what goes in his gauges, is that not is like if that's if it comes up cool, but you're not gunning for it?
I would say it's if it comes up cool, it's kind of hard to gun for EXs with Hakumen just because of the way things kind of work with
Okay,
them.
he's not like Bang or something.
Yeah, yeah, he's not like Bang.
Okay,
I mean, he appreciates EXs a lot because we went over like a lot of his stuff is either like slow or on curve at best. So having a way to surprise above curve is just very very good.
sure.
But
So if you do happen to have Enma in hand and another
mhm.
one has wound up in your gauge at some point, cool. Recur that and you have EX Enma, and that feels pretty good.
Yeah, yeah,
Or really any of his cards would benefit from that, but don't that's not your game plan.
yeah. That's not your game
Don't
plan.
try to get that situation running. Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. And also, like you were saying, like, oh, we could try to get the EX Enma. Usually, like Enma's lower on the priority of things you want to retrieve. So if your opponent sees you go, oh, I'm grabbing Enma back, they'll
Oh,
probably
they
you're probably
they know
tipping them off to like, ha, why would they get Enma back of all
right.
things?
But if I have EX sweep or something that I think that sweep is probably a card I would like to recur anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
That that
Yeah, it tends to be.
that doesn't telegraph too much information. Maybe I gun for the EX sweep. So, but is the triage then for this recursion stuff just like your best cards are what you recur first? Your Zantetsu, your Shippu, your focus, maybe your sweep.
I would say it's not so much your best cards so much as the cards that'll immediately help you in the moment. Um, you know, uh, Hakumen, like I said, he deck pressures himself. So sometimes you're not curating your gauge completely, and you have to just flip, just to prevent a deck out from occurring or something.
Right.
In which case, like if your opponent's at range 3, like it doesn't make sense to be recurring Shippu and Zantetsu just yet. Like you might need to get your Gurren, like your Assault, and then
Right.
these become live. But
So so you probably haven't perfectly curated your gauge because half of it's random anyway.
mhm,
And you need to respond in the moment to what you need. So just look at what you've got and get it there. Hopefully
mhm,
you can do better by curating your gauge a little bit, but there's other stuff going on in Exceed, and you
yeah,
might have higher priorities than that.
yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, like, yeah, I said like grab what you can in the moment, but usually what you want to do is like, yeah, you use or like I said with the assault example, like I mean, usually assault's like actually pretty good because like I said, Hakumen likes going assault and then hey, now I'm threatening these on the next turn,
Right.
but like usually want to like you'll spend a little bit of time leveraging your retrieval to like get into the position and then you can retrieve your best cards.
Right.
So
Okay.
but of
Sure.
course like I said it's maybe you're just having a good game and you can just exceed in a good position and then you can just retrieve the best cards too. So
Right.
what I was talking about was just more the issue with non-compliance. But yeah, if you're totally in the situation of we're pulling ahead, we can just afford to get the best stuff and just spam that, then
Right.
feel free to do that.
Or it's I'm in a situation like I had these two in my gauge. Okay, I'm at range 3. Recur this assault advantage next turn. Recur Zentetsu, hit with Zentetsu.
Yeah.
You can set up these little situational combos,
Hmm.
but they do require a little bit of luck with what's in your gauge.
Hmm. Yeah, another thing you can do, this is also a trick I try to employ. Not everyone falls for it, but it does keep people on their toes. Is let's say I assault, gain advantage. I've got I get back my Zantetsu, or well, I mean it works either way. I have either one of these in my gauge. I grab one and try to play the other from hand. The idea
Oh,
being
sure.
like, okay,
Just
well I'm threatening. So like let's say like I retrieved Zantetsu and I go, okay, I'll play Enma on my strike instead because I am threatening the threat of Zantetsu,
Yeah, but
I'm just going to call out their answer. Yeah.
just the act of recurring it, you're kind of making a show of like, I have this in my hand, and then you
Yep.
play the other side of the mix up.
Yep.
And yeah, I see what you mean. Okay, so
Yep.
you kind of innately are pressuring your opponent just by recurring things that they're going to be afraid of Zantetsu anyway. Now they're extra afraid of it because they know you have it.
Yeah.
Okay. Um.
That is a thing you should keep in mind. Like I said with the focus example, they're gonna know you have it, so you want to try to make sure you can cash out on it. That's going to be one of the things with Hakumen is like you don't want to give your opponent time to set up or either dig for an answer or change the situation where you can't cash out. So
Right. Right. Okay. So those are my attacks. Should we talk about Akumetsu now, or should we?
yeah, we might as well round out the attacks. Akumetsu is an ultra, it's an astral ultra, but an ultra nonetheless. So it's a whopping 8 gauge, but that's okay. You're Hakumen, you can afford that. You can either play it for free or you could forgo.
Your
I
entire
won't even
exceed
say
mode.
for. I won't say you will forgo your entire exceed mode. If you manage your resources properly, you can definitely do Akumetsu into exceed mode. I have done it. It's a little difficult, but
Hold up. Wait.
it's possible.
You had 16 gauge.
16 gauge over the course of the whole game.
Oh, I'm sorry. When you said
Not in
Akumetsu,
one go.
when
Like
you said
I went.
when
Oh
you said Akumetsu into exceed mode, I was like,
no,
next turn. Okay, but
no, not next turn.
it's conceivably possible. Okay, do you
Yeah, yeah.
does Hakumen have the ability to kind of dodge the problems inherent in Astrals, where sometimes you just like you're not gonna manually reshuffle in the first place, or is he playing
Um.
slow enough that maybe he will? He can afford that.
Oh, okay. So Akumetsu is probably the most practical. Well, no, it's not probably. It is the most practical astral in all of season 5.
Okay.
Um, usually, so we'll go more into why this is a very practical astral, but I'm just gonna explain just a few other things before I get to that. So we have it's 8 gauge for 10 power, and it reads if you're at range 1, you just win the strike.
Yeah, and you
Um,
win pretty hard at
yeah, yeah.
10 unanswered damage.
Yeah, 10 damage that your opponent can, unless they also have like a range 1 dodge, they can't do anything about this.
Right.
Um, Also, I guess unless they have like a before or after push or pull, which exists, so I guess keep that in mind if
Oh,
so
sure.
you don't get a gotcha there. I have not had that happen to me, but we have called it out in instances where it's a matchup where it's possible. But
Okay.
so like this is like a really good ultra on its own. Maybe not 8 gauge worth, but it's on Hakumen, so like that 8 gauge is totally doable.
Right.
D has gone on record saying he thinks Akumetsu is the possibly no. He said it's the best astral in the game. In a vacuum, that's probably not true, but because it's on Hakumen, I'm inclined to agree with his opinion on that.
Okay.
Um, like we've described like layer 0 Hakumen. You want to do some low tempo things and just slowly build up so that you can kill your opponent. One of those actions that I didn't mention that's pretty low tempo but helps build you gauge is the reshuffle action. So you're more than happy to take the reshuffle action to get this in a rotation. Um, Another weakness of Astrals is your opponent knows you have it and they parry it. But if it's in your discard pile now, and Hakumen has a kicker that says, "Hey, let's shuffle that right back into the deck."
Oh,
So
okay.
this is even if they parry it, if you exceed, it's back in a rotation, and your opponent has to deal with it again.
So now you've actually made Akumetsu into a live threat for later, which Astrals don't typically work that way. Interesting. Okay.
Correct. Yep.
Uh, all right. So I do have a 10 gauge. I'm sorry, a 10 damage payout that is pretty unavoidable at range 1. My opponent's got to know I have it. That might not matter because I can, if I'm in range 1, I just win the strike with it.
Mhm.
In terms of it's the most. You said it's the most practical astral. What does that mean in terms of actual practicality? Because I think that
Okay.
most astrals are not super practical. It seems like. So
Yeah.
is this something that you are likely to do game to game, or is this kind of a niche thing that you sometimes do?
This one is like there are gonna be matchups that are in I won't maybe not entirely determined by the astral, but playing or going for the astral every game as Hakumen is absolutely practical.
Okay.
Um, it's there are board states where you shouldn't do that, but like those are it depends on the board state. It's not so much like an issue of the move itself. Like then those board states would be like moments where Hakumen is just so pressured he can't afford to reshuffle is basically the only time you would forego getting Akumetsu.
Okay.
Akumetsu, I wouldn't say it's a win con on its own, but just having it in rotation is such a threat. Like if your opponent knows you have this and you have like 8 gauge, you can really slow the game to a crawl, which is the pace Hakumen wants to play at. Because there are times where my opponent is like at range maybe 1 or 2. Maybe I don't have Akumetsu in hand yet. Maybe it's still in the deck, but the opponent doesn't know that, so they're like going around using the move action trying to like flee range 1 because if they ever make a wrong move at range 1, the threat of just this blowing them up is just so great that they can't really afford to stand there.
Right.
And if they're
Okay.
like pinched on resources and they can only ever afford to move 1 or 2 spaces at a time, you can just chase after them,
Right. And
and
so,
your inevitability gets like stronger the more you do that.
and I mean, what you're describing now sounds like that the presence of Akumetsu enables you to have a compliant opponent. Now they're playing scared
Yeah,
of the thing that gives you this resource gain. Now you get to, even if you're playing level 1 or level 2 Hakumen, if you get Akumetsu into your deck somewhere,
you
now
can
you
start playing the level 0
now you're
Hakumen we
allowed to
so
play.
desire.
Now you're allowed to play level 0 Hakumen because your opponent's afraid of you.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That is correct. That is why I was very tempted to say Akumetsu is a win condition on its own because it does like
It enables
create a compliant.
that line of play. That's really cool. Okay. So again, I have gauge payouts. I am a gauge payout character. I'm going to be hitting with these things as best I can, preferably probably these 3.
Mhm,
And then Yukikaze is kind of like an anti-loss condition instead of a win condition on its own most of the time. Um, okay, so that's the attacks. It sounds like that's sort of the plan. These are
mhm,
over here somewhere. We'll talk about them, I guess. Maybe they're
mhm.
good boosts. Who knows? Should we get into boosts though?
Uh, suppose we could. I will just mention one more thing on Akumetsu here, I guess. Just like I was mentioning, like yeah, this enables you to create a more compliant opponent so that you can like run your game plan a lot better. It's also like one of the what was it just like all Hawkman things, like you feel incentivized to play as slow as you can and just build up. But eventually, your opponent's going to try and find an answer to this. So, like, you don't want to sit on Akumetsu forever. Eventually, you do want to like cash out on it.
Right.
And I guess another thing is like with Hakumen, we've been seeing like some of his best stuff is slow. So there's gonna be one of his weaknesses is like if you're down, it's kind of hard to make up the life total because your opponent can still hit you, right?
Right.
Even if you're playing your slow things. So like there's the threat of like you might just die before you can make up the difference.
Sure.
Akumetsu gives you a clean way to just win a strike. So just having that on deck and cashing out on that means you can get yourself back into those life or make up the life deficit.
Right. Because
So like
it doesn't really matter if Zentetsu is going to win the game if you have 2 life when you play it and you just die first. But
Yeah,
Akumetsu,
exactly.
you can't. And actually, Yukikaze too. Both of them prevent that from happening. But
Yeah,
this is the scarier
yeah.
one.
Yeah, this is the scarier one. So yeah, like I just want to mention that just because I call Akumetsu like the thing that really short or like it plugs all the holes in like Hakumen's like weaknesses, I would say.
Okay,
Like as soon as you get Akumetsu into rotation, the game goes much better for you. Um,
interesting.
it's why like it's why I would call it the most practical Astro. Like Hakumen like actively does want it and does play it reasonably often.
Okay, okay, cool.
All right, we might as well move on to boosts. Just like I guess his specials, we're gonna see that there's a range of like usefulness to his boosts here. Actually, I'm gonna go back to we'll just do it the same way we did it before.
Sure.
We'll start with Enma. So Enma has this like anti-projectile boost that says, if you're at range 4 and 5, the fireball war ain't happening. Um, it's what? It's pretty all right in the zoner matchup. Like you're not sad to see this. Like it does everything you'd want in that zoner matchup. You just get to go, you can't threaten me at range, and I build a gauge just by playing this. So I would say like it's got very high value in a certain matchups, but then if your opponent's not a zoner, it's like basically does nothing.
Right.
So it's got a very polarizing sort of use case, but
Sure.
that's fine.
It's there to keep
Uh,
his matchup spread from being like too lopsided, but it's not a
yeah,
game plan. It's not what he wants to be doing.
yeah, yeah,
Remind
yeah.
me after this lesson, by the way, after we go off the air, Bana, to tell you why Fumijin is my favorite boost in all of Exceed.
Oh,
Um,
okay, I sure will.
yeah, but so Enma is an okay attack. It has a very conditional boost on it. As we're evaluating these, is
Yeah.
this some of these cards are these just things that I'm going to be spending as force sometimes?
Yeah, you might be. Like Enma is definitely one of those cards that, it's more likely to be forced than a lot of things. I mean, like I said, I like Enma as an attack a lot more than most people.
Right.
So I'm like not too big on turning this into like force just because I like having a fast poke to check people with. But if you're not at like range 2 or 1, depending on like the board state, and you don't have no use for this boost, then yeah, it's basically going to be force in that situation.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay. All right, we have Tsubaki on Gurin, which is spend up to 3 gauge for +1 power each. This is a boost that basically says +3 power. It's an expensive +3 power, but +3 power nonetheless. Um, too bad it's on Gurin because you sure would like to graft this on either Gurin or
On your
just or use the assault thing on Gurin, play this
right.
boost, and then
This is like your only above curve option. So how are you going to confirm this power otherwise?
yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a bit of a puzzle to confirm that, but if you're in a state where you think you can play this boost, you should. If you can live the dream, you play this boost, the opponent's like low on options and they take a low tempo action, you can exceed and threaten to just deal an extra 3 on your next strike for
Right.
no cost. So
Oh, and you wouldn't want to exceed and then do this because you're wasting time in your exceed mode.
yeah, yeah, you're wasting time doing that. Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
like sometimes like you might just have to, but usually you don't want to. Just you don't want to take too many low tempo actions in exceed mode.
Sure, sure. If
Yeah.
you can afford the gauge, I mean, just like with all of these other ones, this is another gauge expenditure.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
could be free, but if it's useful to you on front side, you're okay to play it on front side.
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah. Usually like if you're cashing out on front side, you might not even spend the full 3 gauge. You just realize, oh, I only need 1 or 2 to stun,
To hit
and
a
I'll
hit a
just
break
do
point,
that.
sure.
Yeah. And then, if you do that, like that's fine too. So like this is one of like the few stat boosts we're gonna see on his specials. So like it's nice to have. even if it is expensive. So like
Okay.
you just use it when you can. On Renka we have reach, just +0 to 1 range strike. Um, +0 to 1 range strike shouldn't really need too much explanation to why it's good.
Sure. Makes stuff
Yeah,
above curve. Uh, lets you play the range 3 mix up at range 4. All sorts of fun things.
yeah, you can threaten your Zantetsu at range 3 if need be.
Right.
It's not the greatest because like if they wild swing a spike by accident, you still lose. But if you're in that situation where you just really need to threaten something to kill armor at range 3, like you can do moves like that.
Right.
Um, just in general, just having like plus range is just good.
It
Hakumen,
because Renka isn't doesn't really rate for you as an attack. Do you find yourself using reach a lot, or is this another one that you're often spending as force?
I use reach a lot.
Okay.
It's reach then force and then an attack is kind of like the priority for that.
Okay. Makes sense. Makes sense.
Um, yeah. We'll move on to Yanagi's boost Agito, which is hit advance up to 1. The opponent discards a card at random. Um, I don't really like this boost a whole lot. It doesn't really do much. I would say the only utility you find out of, well, I mean, there's actually a bit of utility. Like you might pair it with Garen so that you can get to range 1 instead of range 2 when you hit with this at max range.
Right.
There's that's kind of like when you would use that. There's a janky way to like play this at range 3, and then with this boost in play, you advance 1, and now you're at range 2, so you can get the +4 power.
Okay.
Um, I've seen that happen. It's not something I recommend just because playing Shippu at range 3 is kind of a big risk. Just because like if the opponent dives or
Or spikes.
spikes because
Sure.
expecting like either this or they just wild swing it. It's like, well, that sucks. But like like I said, there's no. It's not that this has no use case, but it's kind of rare. So I find that like this. I won't say I won't use this boost often, just because, like I said, there's going to be times when you want to slow the game down as Hakumen, and you just don't have like a boost that you really want to play at the moment or something,
Right.
and this turns into a oh I spent my turn building a gauge for free kind of boost.
Sure.
I have done that.
It is that kind of passive play stuff that Hakumen excels
Yeah,
at. Okay.
yeah. So like that's kind of those are kind of the cases for this boost, but otherwise, like for me, this card in general tends to turn into force a lot,
Okay.
just because I don't really like the attack that much, nor the boost, and the boost even less. At least with Yanagi, it's like, well, if I'm expecting the cross out, I can catch him with that. So like it goes like force, attack,
Attack
boost for
then
priority
boost.
on this.
Okay.
Yeah, for this one.
And when you're and I'm sorry, when you're changing, you're spending force, you're changing cards, you're moving something like that.
Hmm.
You're still building gauge at the end of that turn, and I
Correct.
assume that all you're really doing is looking for your big scary payout options when you're changing cards.
Usually, when I'm changing cards with Hakumen, I mean, usually like you're churning through the deck fast enough that you'll find like either a scary option in hand or in the gauge for recursion later.
Right.
So like usually when I'm changing cards with Hakumen, it's to find like an answer, like I need my Yukikaze or my block or something.
Oh, okay.
That's what I find. But usually, like yeah, force is like movement is probably what I'll use it what I'll use it for the most. Like
Okay. Okay. Because
changing cards, yeah,
I'm getting resources other ways anyway. Does that also mean that
yeah,
like having kind of like set like slightly dedicated change cards, or I'm sorry, force fodder in my deck that I'm okay spending? That also means that I'm less likely to need to spend gauge as force, which sounds good to me.
yeah. You so like you usually, I wouldn't say like you're less likely. It means more like with the way your play pattern works, you're less inclined to spend from gauge. You will spend maybe a little bit from gauge just because you need to conserve hand size. Maybe you just want to you found your blocks in there. You don't think you're recurring them, so you want to put them in your
In
discard
your
pile.
discard, so you can reshuffle. Right.
Yeah,
You
stuff
were
like
telling me about
that.
that synergy a second ago. Okay, so
Yeah.
gauge could be used for that, just like it could be used for
Hmm.
landing Zentetsu before exceed mode. Like, don't be so precious that I need to exceed with
Yeah.
my stuff. It
Like
really is
yeah.
okay to spend gauge.
Yeah, it's okay. Hakumen's not a character you want to do the full like, oh, I gotta fully reload. Let's spend all my gauge.
Right.
That sets you completely back. That is antithetical to his play style. You'd rather prep and like build a little bit of gauge. Like you know, just because that does refill your hand, it does progress you to your win con. So you're fine with like doing things like low tempo actions to like refill your hand. You don't have to be high tempo to do that.
Right.
It's just more like I said, sometimes maybe you do need you only need to do some fine tuning and you want to keep the cards in hand, in which case, yeah, you can spend one or two force from gauge depending on like how it's looking, and you can use that to do that instead, like even if you're like one turn and less closer to, or I guess further away to exceeding. But like that is the challenge with Hakumen. It's like managing all the resources and understanding how the tempo of the game is going, and if you can afford to do that.
Right. Okay. Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
Sorry for that little economic break there. Just
Mhm.
as we're talking about all these ways that you can spend force, it occurred to me to
I
ask
mean, it was nice to have that break after we were done with the
with all the
specials, right?
specials. Exactly. Yeah. No, I did it on
Yeah,
purpose right before
it's yeah.
Zentetsu.
Yeah, right before the ultras. Yeah, we'll move on to Kishu on Zantetsu. If you're at range 3, close 2, and strike, which is it's all right. Hakumen does appreciate this boost. It's just unfortunate that it's on Zantetsu
Right.
because that's one of the you'd rather like do that in Zantetsu. Sometimes you'll still be able to do it because you'll have a Zantetsu in hand and you recur the other copy from your overdrive area and do it anyway. Most players will understand that this is a threat, and so they'll try to stand at like range 4 or something so that they turn off this boost, which is kind of unfortunate. But that just the threat of this does mean that you are controlling where your opponent can stand. So
Sure.
it's fine to have still. It just you're gonna look at this boost when you're playing Hakum and you're gonna go, I really wish I could use you right now. I really wish my opponent wasn't standing at range 4 and making it difficult.
Right.
But
And
you know,
if you have like this, like we talked a little bit ago about like range 3 assault into Shippu or into Akumetsu or something like that with your advantage. If you're at, range 5 and
yep.
have the component pieces, if you've got Gurren or you've got assault in your hand or something, cool. Uh Kishu into assault into Akumetsu, like that threat is there even
Okay,
at
so
very
I'm just
long
gonna have to
ranges.
correct you real quick. This is not close to and strike. It is if you are at range 3, you get to do
Oh,
that. You cannot
thank you.
actually do it this
Yeah.
way.
No, sometimes it's
That
important for me
is
to read the cards,
yeah,
read
yeah,
the
yeah.
words that are actually on the cards. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Okay.
That's why I'm saying like standing at range 4 makes this awkward
I
because
see.
it is just completely off. It is completely off.
That makes a lot more
But I
sense
mean, yeah,
now.
you were saying like, well, you could try to. I mean, we are mentioning like the assault into things. It's like, well, this if you don't have assault and you're at range 3, you can just boost this, and
Right.
that does the impression well enough. Even if this is off at range 4, like we have Gurren, we could just close the one with advantage and then boost that. So there are like ways to make it live again, and just this is one of those boosts that, like I said, it's you're gonna look at it, you're gonna wish it were something else because your
Right.
opponent refuses to stand at range 3. But if it were any stronger than that, like it would kind of be brutal, just because
You could
like I said,
confirm these things from
yeah, just
anywhere.
confirming
Yeah.
Akumetsu, confirming that, just like
So it
when this is live, it's super good. So
okay. So it's like if you're using Kishu it's to confirm something that is scarier than the Zantetsu that you were going to play because it's on Zantetsu. So that means that it's
or
probably
the
going to be
others
one of
on
these.
Tetsu. Yeah. Yeah, usually it's to confirm one of these. That's the ideal case. Of course, there's the case of the non-compliant opponent, and you just go, well,
I need
they're
to
just running away from me, and I just need to get into range one.
I need to start swinging at range one. Okay.
Yeah. So
But but it's hard. It's really
obviously,
hard to give up Zantetsu in any case.
I would say so. Like, chances are you'll be able to get Zantetsu back. So if you really need to use this, I would just use the boost,
Okay.
just because, like I said, you have Zantetsu's great. I would prefer to play that if possible, but you have a bit of redundancy. This kind of does like the job a little bit. If you manage to get Akumetsu into rotation, like you have that, you'll have threats still live at range one, even if you spend a Zantetsu.
Right. Okay. Okay.
Um, and like I said, a lot of cases where like you are in a situation where you would play this, like you probably have like a way to get the second Zantetsu back somehow. Like you hit one earlier, or you put in your gauge, and
It
so
wound up
you
engaged
you
somehow. Sure. Sure.
yeah, and then you just flip over, get it back, and then you can you give up an EX Zantetsu, but you can try and confirm the other one. So
Right. Okay. Makes sense. How about
all right.
massive?
Massive. All right. Massive is, it's just a pile of stats. It's very good. What I find is, you usually want to save Yukikaze more for like the end game. So when you're in, well, maybe not just end game, but like either as a way to check the answers to these things or as an end game thing. So I find like early game, mid game, I'm playing the boost on this a lot.
Okay.
Just because it helps you trade up, it lets you threaten a better mix from further away. Just generally good. Um,
And
just like
it in terms of use case, it's like a combination of like reach and defend, right? Like you put it on the things
yeah,
that would benefit from either of those boosts, you're probably doing okay.
yeah, yeah. It's it's just generally good. You can just put it on your sweep and dare the opponent to cross out at range one. But yeah, no, just generally good. Like I said, you will probably be boosting this often, just because it's just having a pile of stats means your opponent can't just bully you, and it's like sometimes you just want a way to make yourself scary without like relying on the fact that you have to spend 4 gauge to be unkillable. So, what I found was like as I was learning Hakumen, it was I was valuing Yukikaze a little too much because I value just I need a stun immune attack that prevents me from dying when I really should have been pressuring the opponent with massive. So my my I guess summary here is play massive as often as you can until you can't anymore, I guess.
Right.
That's
And by then Yukikaze is probably going to be a going concern. Play Yukikaze then instead.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. All right.
How about Zenshin?
Zanshin's it's a fine boost. The thing is like it reads good. You know what you can it's usually just gonna be stun immunity like 99% of the time, and that's still fine. There's this text that says before if you were hit plus 3 power, add this to your gauge. Your opponent usually never lets you have this. They're just gonna, either initiate with focus, and you're gonna be sad that you don't have a focus of your own, or do something to disarm this just because they don't want to like if they proc this boost, then they've created a situation where you're the king of trades and they don't want that. And if you get gauge from this, like, okay, we're progressing you towards your win con. So
Right.
like I said, it never procs, but it's very good. When you're in your early game, or you're not confident Shippu is going to land because your opponent has used none of their grasps and none of their crosses. Like you can just play this and you can usually force a situation.
Right. And kind of just like with what I was mentioning defend a second ago, stun immunity does a similar thing where like you put it onto a card with a decently wide range band like Gurren or like Assault or something. So like even if your opponent
Mhm.
does move somehow, you can catch them. Is that
Yeah.
kind of typically what you're putting it on?
Yeah, that's kind of like the idea. That is pretty much the idea. This boost also just uh it funnily enough it synergizes very well with the attack just because you just put it on Shippu. You're very slow. Your opponent's probably gonna hit you, so now your Shippu is like 11 power.
Right.
Um,
And
you
and
know,
and you already have the range band to make it. I mean, you're not really caring about
yeah,
stun immunity unless they're at mid range and they spike you or something. But
yeah,
okay, it's interesting that
but
massive is on the ultra that kind of massive makes all of your cards into Shifu because it gives them all defenses and more range. And Zanshin makes all of your cards Yukikaze because it gives them stun
yeah,
immunity and bonus power if you got hit.
basically,
Interesting. Okay.
yeah. So these like I said with specials and the attack part, I was like, oh, these are kind of mediocre. We have stuff that's kind of like I don't like playing at all. Stuff that's fine to play. Boosts are the same thing. We've ultra boosts are good, and then we have like the boosts on here, and it's like, oh, we got one that's like, we can just throw that away. We have one I like playing a lot, one that's like usually worth playing, but maybe you can't, and then you have one that's like, oh, it depends on the matchup. So
Right.
yeah, that like I said, the with Hakumen, it's like okay, we got a few like really good things, we got a few like maybe mediocre to bad things, so it's gonna be like a puzzle to like make sure you can get to your good things and spend like your bad things in the appropriate way.
Right. Okay. And I assume then because Akumetsu is such a strong astral for Hakumen,
Oh right, I totally forgot there's a
yeah,
boost on this
yeah,
card.
burst is probably less of a consideration for him than it is for
Oh
most
no, like
characters.
okay, so yeah, burst. It's not unplayable because there you might end up in the game where you're not going to get to 8. So you're out of if you're not getting to 8, you're not getting your exceed reshuffle. So you can't like
You,
okay, so like that threat's like this threat's completely like dead. At that
right,
point, you burst, but usually you want to avoid situations like that. So, usually you're not bursting. And by usually, I mean like 99.999% of the
right.
time you're
You,
not
you'd
bursting.
always, always, always prefer to play Akumetsu, or at least have it
Yeah.
to threaten in your deck.
Yep.
Okay,
Correct.
makes sense. All right, cool. So that's the specials and ultras. It seems like then as we get further and further away from uh uh level 0 Hakumen that we described, the the new Hakumen that we're advocating for is finding a way to get your threats, which are these, and being spending your front side build up period, not just playing passively, but playing in a way that is pressuring to your opponent and is actively trying to curate your threats. And then when you do exceed, if you do exceed, which you might do a little bit later because you are spending gauge when you need to, then you blow them up with a well curated hand. Is that pretty much the plan?
That is the ideal scenario with Hakumen, I would say.
Okay, cool. So
That is
so
the ideal scenario. Yep.
it's a little bit less passive. It's a little bit less just free value by prepping all the time. I do need to occasionally throw out some attacks to check my opponent and make sure that they're paying
Mhm.
attention. I need to be moving to get my stuff online. I need to be getting Akumetsu to make the game slow down. And then when I exceed, it is to play these big scary things.
To play those big scary things, if you can. Ideally, I would say when you get to exceed mode, um, the ideal situation is you try to play maybe at least one ultra, like on exceed mode. You're not getting the full value because you spent 8 for a free 4, I guess.
Right.
But you know,
Well, then you
You
got
know,
some
it's
recursion,
a tall,
which
yeah,
the
yeah,
recursion is
exactly.
probably
Like,
worth some gauge. You get a couple more copies of focus or something. You're feeling okay about yourself.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I would say like, yeah, the recursion is actually the strongest part of the exceed mode.
Okay,
It
and
just
then the free reshuffle that you mentioned too of just
yeah.
keeping yourself from decking out.
Yeah, yeah. You what was it like? I guess the free reshuffle is not the strongest part, but it's very important. You will just be using the exceed mode just for free reshuffle in like really dire instances.
Right.
But yeah, like you like exceed mode is pretty mandatory as Hakumen just because of like yeah, like you're churning through the deck. You need the reshuffle. You need to be able to get back certain threats. So you so you once again there's the tension of I need to spend enough to keep my opponent on their toes, but not enough that I am forever out of reach of the exceed mode.
Right,
So
because then I will deck myself out. Then I won't be able to
mhm,
recur any of my cool things.
exactly.
Okay, okay. Should we also talk about the normals a little bit, or for the most part, does Hakumen kind of play them as any other character would?
I mean, so we established that specials are kind of like okay to like bad, and they set you back. Hakumen probably, I would say, appreciates the normals a little more as a result, because then they do the role of these things,
They don't
but they
cost
don't set
gauge.
them back.
Right,
Yeah, they don't cost gauge. Like like I said with you can check people with Enma. If you're at range one, you'd rather do it with grasp though.
right.
Um, was it? Yeah, I mean, was it like so? We have a fast. We have a kind of a lame mid speed. We have we have a fast. We have a fast killer, so like this, only beats fast and nothing else. I mean, well, I'll stop memeing and consider this a special. It's like this is a slow killer, but like otherwise, it only trades against fast or and loses to mid speed. So it's like the attacks are kind of like narrow, a lot more narrow in application than normals, right?
Right.
So you find like, oh, if I can play a normal, it'd be great. Also, they go in a gauge. If I need a specific normal, then it's there. I can get it back. Um, Also, like once again, we had like we have boosts that are like okay, only works in certain instances. Kind of not really a boost at all. This one's good, but it's committal, and maybe you don't want you're not in a situation where you want to go. Oh, I have to strike right away. Maybe you don't want to spend gauge on power. And maybe this is dead in the matchup. So you look at your boosts on your normals and you go, well, if I need consistent power, which I kind of lack.
Instead of Tsubaki, maybe I use Fierce instead.
Yeah. So like it's gonna be like that tension of like, okay, what's the deck giving me? Like, how am I pressuring the opponent with the cards I'm given and still building gauge? So, like use the normal boosts like with the way you do with normal exceed fundamentals, just because like yeah, you know, Akumen specials boosts kind of like like I would say the mediocre range, so like you will lean on your normals a little bit more
Okay, both as attacks that actually generate you gauge, and as
as
boosts
boosts
that actually
that
shore up your
let you
neutral
like
and your threats.
yeah
Okay.
as a way to like play a card that changes the situation while still gaining you gauge, right? So
Right, right. Okay, sure, sure. All right. Well, cool. Is there any other kind of strategic considerations that you want to mention about Hakumen, or should we move into counterplay?
strategic considerations. So I think what we might have to do here with this one is we're going to talk about maybe the counterplay and then go into strategic considerations, just because Hakumen's weird like that.
Okay, no problem.
Um,
Yeah. Then in that
that's
case, how do you beat this guy?
how do you beat? Like I said, you just want to like have no fear against him. Um, like I already established, like his attacks not that amazing. His boosts also like aside from like a few key ones, it's kind of like okay, not too crazy either. Like he has to like be online.
Right.
You know, like so what's going to happen is, you know, if you're just letting Hakumen just play a little bit passive, build up his gauge, if he just keeps like trying to go into a boost war with you so you can build gauge, like you don't want to do that. You want to prevent him from setting the pace. You're going to set your own pace. So that's going to be things like, well, if he's trying to like sit back, try and strike into him, maybe try to force him into using attacks that set him back. Like maybe you just go, yeah, we're just gonna cross. You're gonna have to play that Yanagi, or you know, set yourself a little bit back there. Otherwise, like I'm
Otherwise,
just gonna
you
win.
just
Yeah,
get some value on your turn,
yeah.
and he doesn't do anything about it.
hmm
Okay.
It's also one of those things where I mentioned a few times, like, hey, you know, the scary thing Zantetsu. You know, if he initiates, he can kill sweep. So
So
like
throw a sweep into him.
initiate with, you know, just throw sweep into him. Like, what's he gonna do? Like, okay, like if you're at range one, like this doesn't do anything. These don't really do much. Yanagi just like running Yanagi into sweep is like the worst feeling in the world. Like, sure, like okay, you took 7, but now Hakumen's down, like actually down a gauge because he had to spend 2, got 1 back,
Right. Right.
so he's like further away, and you basically traded even. Um, and like I said, he spent a gauge, so you feel a lot better about that. Um, you know, like I said with the Yuki Kadze, like you don't actually need to fear that all too much. If you're like initiating with a sweep, like you're trading even, he's spending a gauge or 4 gauge on this one actually.
Right.
Um, what was it with you do stuff like that. Um, like we mentioned, like, oh, you know, he's got a few good boosts. These ones, so like if you actually get into a boost war with Hakumen, and let's say you notice like, oh, he put Yuki Kaze into his gauge because it went off the top there, like I have one less big boost to worry about. Like you could probably just boost war Hakumen and
Right.
threaten to just like hit him for a bunch of damage. Like
He,
obviously you don't want to do that for too long because then you're playing the game of okay,
uh,
Hakumen's gonna he's
you're just
gonna just
giving him
yeah,
time. Yeah.
he's yeah, you're gonna give him time. He's gonna accumulate gauge. He's gonna accept that he's losing this strike, and then he's gonna, you know, try to exceed and do stuff to you.
Right.
Um,
Does he also have some problems with like information bleed because he is just
oh yeah, that
pull
is one of the biggest issues with Hakumen is the information bleed because he's putting stuff in a gauge all the time,
right,
right?
or option bleed. You mentioned you know you put massive engage. You're like sick. Don't have to deal with massive for a few turns now. I can boost for him.
Yeah, yeah.
But
So like
if both copies of Zentetsu are both happen to go engage, you can't do anything about that.
yeah, that's correct. So there is like, yeah, option bleed, information bleed is a weakness with Hakumen. So even if while like that is so like he's getting he's getting closer to a win con, but his options are getting worse as
Right.
time goes on. So you want to like see what's being dropped and start exploiting the holes in that. Um, you know, and I mean, Hakumen has ways to patch that, but he needs time to do that. So you just don't want to give him the time.
Right.
That was like very important. I just almost forgot about it. Thank you for reminding me.
Happy to help.
Um, I was gonna mention one other thing. So let's see, boost war information bleed. 1 second, let me just review real quick. I
Of course.
swear there was. I guess yeah. What was it? Like Perry's actually pretty good against Hakumen. We mentioned like, okay, well, he's got a few really strong options that he can threaten. Like, okay, if you're worried like I don't have an answer to Zantetsu, like instead of like risking having him chop your block in half, just parry
Harry,
like, you know,
probably one of these.
like yeah, one of these, yeah, basically. And like you can really like shut down, or shutdown's a little strong, but like in the moment you can definitely make Hakumen squirm because now he doesn't have a payout he can use to try and check you with.
Right.
Because like, yeah, okay, so his slow options are down. Like, okay, well, he can't hit you with that or that anymore. Like, okay, what you can play a fast into him now. Like, Yanagi's not the worst thing to get hit by.
Sure. So
Like,
you have your, especially when he's already exceeded, especially like when that reshuffle has
mhm.
already happened. You throw now parry Akumetsu, get rid of the stuff that he's going to use right now on you.
Yeah, yeah, you definitely do stuff like that. Um, yeah, and I also mentioned like people shouldn't be striking into Hakumen when he's exceeded. Obviously, like you generally want to do that. Sometimes you might be better off striking into him if you can establish your game before he can recur something valuable. But if you notice like, oh, his ultras are down when he exceeded and he's planning on retrieving him, then yeah, sure, you can go ahead and try and get some damage in now before he gets stuff back. But it's all a matter of like utilizing the information he's given you.
Right. Sure. Okay.
Right. Okay, so that covers most of the counterplay. Like it's a little easier said than done, but like if you do pay attention to Hakumen's options, like you'll notice you have a lot more options than you think you do against him.
Sounds good. And then you
Mm.
mentioned that you wanted to talk strategic considerations
Yeah,
now that
yeah.
we've been informed of the counterplay.
Yeah, so because like I said, because a lot of like Hakumen counterplay is we're going to stop Hakumen from trying to set the pace. What we're gonna do is we're gonna like throw a wrench in everything. If he exceeds, we're gonna make sure like he doesn't have the card in hand by pairing it. If he's like trying to play passive to just boost or to get engaged just by like boosting something, maybe not low impact per se, but he's like boosting, just doing micro movement. Like we're gonna punish him. We're just gonna strike into him. We're gonna kill him before he gets there.
Right.
You kind of need to understand that's gonna be like a thing your opponent's gonna be doing. I'm gonna just give like an example. Or I kind of gave an example of this already. Oh, I guess it in exceed mode, you can pick up an option or pick up an option and then throw the answer card to it and just try to throw them off. That's kind of like what Hakumen kind of turns into is you're going to try and make a read on the opponent and see like what or and try to answer like how they're going to answer you.
Sure. So you have like, I mean, many of these cards literally are glowing red, but like
Hmm.
you have these big glowing red target cards that are like, these are my big scary
Hmm.
threats. And Exceed is a game fundamentally about mix-ups, which means that these things will enable other cards. And Hakumen is going to have to crutch on those because my
Hmm.
opponent is going to be answering these threats.
Yeah, they're going to try and answer this. This is why I say like we kind of want to run these out kind of a little bit early sometimes. Just because if you're being super predictable and you go, I don't want to spend 4 gauge, I'll subsidize it with my exceed mode, and then your opponent parries it. Then what were you even doing?
Right, right. Sure, you just wasted a bunch of turns to hit with nothing. Okay. So
Yeah,
you're the all of those strategic considerations that we've discussed this whole time are because your opponent is not a training mode dummy.
yeah,
They will mess with your plans. You do need
yeah.
to be throwing things in 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 basic mode on front side just to
Hmm.
keep tempo because your opponent won't let you because they're saving answers.
Hmm.
Gotcha.
That's correct. I'm gonna try and I'll give you like one example I see all the time. As what was it? So I play Zanshin as a boost. And I already mentioned this. Like you play this, and your opponent goes, "Well, I don't want you to like actually gain the value on this, so I'm going to initiate into you with focus."
Right. So do you just defend with spike?
Defend. So like usually you'll play this like if you play this at like range 3 or something, like you incentivize the opponent's incentivized to cross instead, right?
Right.
Just so that they don't actually hit you. They escape any sort of stun immune setup that might be trying, just because like now this doesn't actually reach if they crossed at like range 3 or something.
Right.
Usually you're playing this like range 1, you're threatening it like, oh, I'm you're not going to escape on my next strike, and if you go faster than me, I'm going to nuke you. So opponent, I mean, maybe they'll just play cross anyway. Like this is going to be the next play I'm going to describe is going to have weaknesses as well. This is
Right.
all like, it's all about knowing what your opponent's tendencies and
Right.
the
Because
Yomi layers are going to be. But
yeah, because
like,
this stuff's enabled by mix-ups. Sure.
yeah. But if you know your opponent's gonna try and deny you with like either a focus, maybe they just even initiate with block because they just didn't have focus. That was a good time
Right.
to play your Zantetsu. And this has worked shockingly too often. I just play this, my opponent goes, no, I'm just gonna deny you value. Like, what's the worst you can do to me? Like, play like a fast option, I'll trade up. Okay, if that's what you're thinking, I'll chop you in half. I don't care if I'm getting further away from exceed mode. I beat focus on your turn.
Sure. And
That's a
now
lot of value.
now we're one Yomi layer, not letter, deeper. Cool. Instead of focus, you're gonna respond with cross. I hit you with grasp, or I hit you with Enma. Right.
Yeah, yeah,
Like it the counterplay develops its own counterplay, but it's all enabled by what I think my opponent is doing.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And the reason I say like we start with this is like, it's stun immunity. You think stun immunity is like a bit of an answer boost, but like if the opponent is playing a bunch of or like trying to boost war you, and like that would be a time when you might want to play stun immunity to like sort of negate that. Opponent should be aware that that's your answer, and they'll try to like tech you there. If you start with this, you are incentivizing the opponent to respond to you in some way.
Right.
Um, Either like they got to strike and try to remove the value, or they tech that. If they tech that, they pass turn to you. You can start doing whatever you want again. You've set the pace again.
Right.
That's kind of what I mean with Hakumen and like setting the pace. Like, I'm not just saying you can set the pace in more ways than just like threatening Zantetsu at range 1. You can threaten to get value off something, and if the
And
opponent doesn't do anything about that,
mi-
you're strengthening your game plan.
and if they do something about it, they just spent their turn doing that rather than killing
Then
you.
setting up their own game plan.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, I said like his specials aren't very good, and this one's better on offense. Like, a lot of them are better on offense, right?
Right.
So Hakumen, surprisingly, outside of like you know Yukikaze, doesn't have a lot of answer shapes, which is why like actually striking into him or setting up on your turn and then trying to cash out tends to work pretty well against him.
Right.
Which is why, as Hakumen, you need to do whatever you can to slow down the opponent's pace by like, playing a boost that you're threatening to cash out with and forcing an answer so that you can then either like, slow down the pace or try
Yeah,
to make a read and call
it
out the opponent.
it's like level 0 Hakumen is play super passively and get all your stuff. Level 1 Hakumen is play kind of aggressively or more aggressively than that and actually cash out your stuff sometimes.
Hmm.
Level 2 Hakumen is like force the opponent to make you play passively.
Yeah. I would
Or
say,
force the opponent to allow you to play passively by being threatening.
yeah, that is the good way to describe the layers. Yeah. I guess a tangent I'll go on is originally when D was designing Hakumen, he had intended Hakumen to be a parry and riposte character, and
Right.
while that original design didn't make it, the way Hakumen plays now is kind of in a way still like that. What I have done is I like with my example here, where it's like I boost this and I'm going to answer my opponent's answer with the Zantetsu.
Right.
Like, I have preempted a preempted a response from the opponent, and I'm going to parry that. That is kind of like what I've seen Hakumen turn into.
Okay, so once everybody knows the matchup, once I no longer get to fight a non-compliant opponent. I'm sorry, I no longer get to fight a compliant opponent who just doesn't know what they're doing against Hakumen. When everybody knows the score, when everybody knows what he's doing, he turns into this like, all right, deal with my threat. Ah, you dealt with my threat in this way. You're dead because of that.
That is going to be a large part of Hakumen, yeah.
Interesting. Okay, but doing that requires matchup knowledge. It requires an opponent who knows how to stop level 0 and level 1 Hakumen.
Yeah, you need to know what layer your opponent's on. There's going to be some player knowledge involved as well, but
Yep.
yeah, that is kind of what Hakumen turns into. Because, like I said, if the opponent knows, hey, Hakumen's answer game's pretty weak, I'll just run my game and just crush him before he can slow the pace down and become a god.
Right.
Then, well, how does Hakumen do that? Then, well, he has to play in an assertive way that makes it so the opponent goes, well, I can't just run my game. I have to answer yours.
Right. I'm going to lose to Zenshin. I'm going to lose to Massive. I need to address these,
Hmm.
and they will address them in hopefully an exploitable way.
Correct.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Sure. I get you.
All right. I think that covers everything I wanted to mention. Anything you wanted to some clarification about?
No, I think that was great. I think that I definitely know a lot more about Hakumen than I came in knowing. I think you also dispelled some misconceptions I had about the character because I did think he was more passive than that. So it's cool to hear that he actually does have some like layers that require, different ways to think about the character. Hopefully other people who are watching this who might have a negative opinion about fighting Hakumen might find that interesting as well
I
and
mean,
might
I don't think my guide will change that. I mean, people still have a negative idea of Hakumen, not just because layer 0 Hakumen's very passive, but because you have a bunch of things to keep track of. Playing Hakumen's very slow, and it creates the feeling of passivity, even if Hakumen's playing active.
right. Okay, sure. I get you.
I don't think he is destined to escape the
The,
reputation of
of being
Mister
being kind of salt
Yeah,
inducing.
yeah.
All right. Well, I'll put it this way. At the very least, I don't think that your guide has done anything to increase the amount of salt in the world. So, if that's what we can get out of a Hakumen guide, I will take it. So,
Excellent.
Bana, thank you so much for your expertise. As always, it's always a blast talking to you. I really appreciate your time.
Oh no, it's always great.
And folks at home, I hope you learned something. I hope you had fun, despite the fact that we were talking about Hakumen this whole time. I will see you all for the next one. Goodbye, everybody.